Welcome to FEO on the Air, the voice of the festivals and events industry in Ontario. This week, it's FEO Masterclass with your host, FEO CEO Dave McNeil.
Thank you for joining us this morning on our FEO on the Air Masterclass. I'm Debbie Mann and I'm subbing for Dave McNeil this morning. So while he's on vacation having a little bit of R&R. Just before we start, a couple of housekeeping notes. We're going to be recording this. So for those who want to review it later, it's available to you. If you do have any questions for Owen or me, you can put it in the chat room, or you can raise your hand and we will ask the question, and you can ask the question directly to Owen. Before we talk to Owen, I want to let you know that next week's podcast is our Supplier Spotlight series, and we'll be talking to Matt Sobey from Prevail Activations, and we hope you'll be able to join us. All right, let's get to the meat of it. Owen, let me introduce you to the group that has joined us here. Owen is from Safeguard Perimeter. And Safeguard was introduced to us about 6 years ago, I believe, and they've been a member ever since and have been a proud sponsor of our conference. So we really appreciate you coming and doing this with us, Owen. And Owen is going to be educating us on in our industry about HVM, or hostile vehicle mitigation. I've got that right, Owen? Great. And providing solutions for you. So he's going to provide his knowledge, his expertise, and I just want to pass it over to you. Thanks for joining us. This is Owen Heritage from Safeguard Perimeter. And so there seems to be a lot of attacks, an increase on the attacks that are happening in the industry, Owen, especially like is it the Lapu Lapu Festival in Vancouver not too long ago. I have so many questions, but if it's not covered, we'll ask more questions, but I know you have a very detailed presentation. So over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Debbie, for inviting me to come and have this sort of education session on HVM. I'm just let me walk through the history of Safeguard quickly, just so everybody understands how we got in this space and what brought us into this space. Back in 2000, it would have been 2016, I was running a company called Powell Contracting, which is a highway contractor. So Powell Contracting itself does all the Jersey barrier on the highway, all the noise wall, all the guide rail, and all the crash systems. If everybody remembers back to when in Toronto, I think it was probably around 2018, maybe 2017, there was the van attack. The van attack happened down Yonge Street, where a gentleman drove his van down the sidewalk, injuring and unfortunately killing a few pedestrians in the path. At that time, because we were the largest supplier of Jersey barrier in Ontario, our phones started ringing, and we started getting calls off the hook where people wanted to protect different things, and they were looking to use Jersey barrier. So at that time, we put barrier around Union Station in Toronto, around a few of the embassies at the Sky Dome. But that got us into thinking, well, Jersey barrier isn't actually crash tested or designed to be used as a hostile vehicle barrier. So we were putting out barrier that wasn't rated to be hit in the manner that people were asking, and it was giving this false sense of security. So we started Safeguard Perimeter in 2017, primarily just to introduce hostile vehicle barriers into the marketplace. And then from there, really what it became was, because nobody understood what the barriers were, it really became into educating everybody and educating the market. So that sort of led us into this space. And then since we've been in this space, obviously, unfortunately, globally, there's been a lot of different attacks, and there's been a lot of publicity around, and a lot of different groups globally promoting and educating people how to use vehicles as weapons. So that sort of has opened up this market. So what I'm going to go through today is really what is a hostile vehicle barrier? What is it designed for? What guidelines are out there in the industry that you can get for free to follow? So if you're running an event, there is guidelines out there for you. So it helps you with the planning of it. So I'm going to go through temporary barriers. I'll go through fixed barriers, and I'll go through the hostile vehicle mitigation guidelines that are available. I'm just going to share my screen here, and then we can get into it. And then at the end, what I do is I'll go through some questions, question period, if anybody has any questions. So let's start with the Jersey barrier itself. So everybody understands what a Jersey barrier is and what it looks like. I'm going to run a quick video in a second here. So Jersey barrier is designed to be on the highway. It's designed to be hit at a 45-degree angle. It's what we call a redirectional barrier. The barrier itself, it gets hit at a 45, and it's designed to put the vehicle back into the roadway. It's not designed to be hit at a 90-degree angle. So we ran a test. We have a testing facility. So we ran a test and we hit this at 90 kilometers an hour. I'll share this video so everybody can see what happens. And this is where the misconception comes in, because it's a big 5,000-pound piece of concrete. Everybody believes that this is a safe tool to put out in place. So let's look what happens when it gets hit at 90 kilometers an hour. It fails, right? So this is what we started when we ran this test back in, I think it was 2018. And we looked at the barriers themselves, and we were like, okay, so the perception on the market is that a Jersey barrier will protect crowds and will protect people and infrastructure. And it really doesn't. So if you have a vehicle hitting it directly at a 90, unfortunately it fails. It breaks apart. So then you have the vehicle. We hit this at 90. The vehicle slowed down 10 kilometers an hour and continued through that barrier. And then you have all the shrapnel in the vehicle continuing on. So that led us into, okay, well, what is in the market that is available, and what products can we put out to actually protect people in events? And that led us into looking at different products. So if you look at the products that are really on the ground right now, there's 3 of them in Ontario. There's the Archer 1800, which is owned by by Meridian. There's the Mifram product, which primarily we use the MVB 3X barrier, and then there's the Omni Stop barrier. These are the primary barriers that are being used in Ontario. So what we did was in 2023, we joined with the Ontario Traffic Council, and we put guidelines and measures together for festival and events for anybody organizing anything in Ontario. And within those guidelines, hang on one second. I'm gonna change my screen so we can see this. So within this guideline, we put together what's available, and this is designed for, yes.
Sorry, did you bring up a new you have to stop sharing this one and then bring the new one up. There you go. Got it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this guideline, we worked with the Ontario Traffic Council, and we put guideline measures in place for everybody to use. Within this, I won't go through the whole thing, but really what it does in here, it shows you and it defines what hostile vehicles are, what the ramifications are in the marketplace, how it came into the marketplace, and what type of events would use it. And then what products are available in the marketplace and what to use and not use. The good thing about this is we built in a risk assessment tool. So if you're looking at an event, you can start to go through the guidelines and start to build a risk assessment. The risk assessment itself will tell you what you need to protect and what layers of protection you need and how much protection. So if you walk through the risk assessment tool within this guideline, And then you can work with emergency services, the police departments, the fire departments, the city, the city officers, and you can start to build a plan that encompasses all of your area of your event, and what risks you have coming in. So when we look at this, we look at what type of event it is, where it is, what access there is to the event, and this tool walks you through that, so you can start to build a plan for your event. And I'm just going to skip to the bottom here. So there's lots of information. I'll share this after, and there's product information in here. But really the useful tool in this is the questionnaire in it, and it starts to go through for event organizers. It gives you, let's let it catch up here. It gives you what type of event. So it gives you a questionnaire to walk through so you don't miss anything when you're organizing your event. So the parameters around the event date, it gives you the type of organization, or if there's anybody from a dignitary or a politician coming, to what type of security you need. It walks through everything so you don't miss anything when you're actually planning out your event. It's a very useful checklist to go through. So that itself is available. I'll share this. Just be warned when you actually look at it. Some of the crash test ratings on this have changed. So we wrote this in 2023. This year, the London police did a lot of different crash testing because they were obviously, London itself is a big target. So they changed some of the crash testing, they changed some of the ratings. So it really comes down to it, I'll get into it in the other presentation. Let me just stop sharing this, and I'll go through some of the crash ratings on what's available out there, and then some of the misconceptions. Come back up. Okay. So
Yeah.
we've gone, yeah, okay, perfect. So we've gone through, I'm going to run a short video which gives you an idea of a regular festival, an event, and what can happen. The product shown in this video is more permanent structures. So there's temporary and permanent. Temporary obviously is a quick setup, and permanent structures in around cities and coordinates that are built in, purposely crash rated to protect. So I'm just going to run this video. We'll go through the ratings after.
Since 2014, vehicles have been used as weapons in over 140 attacks around the world. A quarter of these attacks led to deaths. 2/3 led to significant injuries. Public spaces that are clear of obstacles with room for a vehicle to accelerate are prime targets for attackers. 9 out of 10 attack locations did not have significant security barriers in place. Hostile vehicle mitigation comes in many rated forms. It puts a protective barrier around your site, protecting you, your people, and your infrastructure from those planning to do harm. For more information, please visit the NPSA and Protect UK websites at www.npsa.gov.uk and www.protectuk.police.uk.
Happening globally, you can see this. I know it's a bit dramatic, this video, but this is what's happening globally around the world. If you look at what happened at the Lapu Lapu Festival recently, and even this weekend in Liverpool during the celebration for the soccer finals, or football finals they call it, there was a vehicle that drove through the parade. which is unfortunately it's happening. So when we're planning an event, what we want to look at is doesn't matter what the barrier is. The barriers will all be tested and they'll all be rated. So in North America, we use the ASTM standard. Excuse me. In the UK, they use what's called the PAS 68 standard. The standards are the same. Really, what it looks at is the weight of the vehicle, the speed, and then how far the actual barrier travels itself before it stops that vehicle. So they broke them into three ratings. There's a P1 rating, which is what they showed in that video. So that video when that van hit and it stopped just before that family, that's a P1. So a P1 rating will travel a maximum of 3 feet or just over 3.3 feet. Then you get into a P2 rating, which travels up to 23 feet for the actual barrier to work. And P3 travels from 23 to 98 feet. And this is where the misconception is. A lot of product that gets out, we need to really understand what it's rated for. Because when you're designing the perimeter around your event, you want to make sure that you build enough space for the vehicle or for the vehicle mitigation equipment to actually work properly. What a lot of people tend to do is they'll put a vehicle mitigation barrier and they'll put a tent or a vendor right behind it. The problem is most of the temporary vehicles fall into, or temporary barriers fall into that P3 rating. So you need to be able to have the space and utilize the space accordingly to protect the crowd and protect the people properly. So when we design a traffic plan itself, we build in that buffer zone. So when we're actually designing a traffic plan, you need to a traffic plan, then you build a hostile vehicle mitigation plan. Within that plan, you build in your buffer, so you're safely protecting the occupants within it. And what happens is if you stick out HVM barrier, you give this misconception of safety, but if it's not put out properly, it's not as safe as what it appears to be and what everybody believes it to be. So the most important part is understanding what barrier you're going to use and what it's being tested at and what it's rated at, so that when you design your surroundings, you have the appropriate space. And that you blend the traffic management plan and the HVM plan together. Space is always a premium in events because you have a certain square footage and you want to fill it for events. But the most important part is to actually build in that buffer area. And this is where the misconception comes in. The other thing is, if you look at this, the picture on the screen here where we built in the buffer zone, so most people always focus on blocking the roadway, but you also need to, because vehicles can get around. So if it's a planned or coordinated event, vehicles can get around the barriers by using sidewalks or boulevards. So you also want to take into account, and when we build a vehicle mitigation plan, we look at what is in that physical area. Is there a lamp post? Is there a planter? Is there other obstruction? So you can use physical attributes within that roadway to help you when you're actually planning out. Is if it a tree? You can coordinate on where you put your placement of the barrier itself. So there's lots of different HVM products on the market, and there's lots available for purchase and rent in Ontario. Each one has its own sort of set of standards, and each one comes with its own pluses and flaws itself in terms of how it goes out, and each one has its own cost structure. That more heavy duty barriers obviously are more expensive because it takes equipment to move them to site. And once they're at site, if you look at the top right corner, that's called the Omni Stop. We'll get into it later. But you need heavy equipment to move that. And once it's in, it's not movable itself. Where if you look at the other two, those are classed as temporary barriers. They can be built on site and they can be moved. So we'll go through some of the product that's available in Ontario that's on the ground right now. So the Archer 1200 is made by Meridian. It's a 700-pound barrier. It's designed to be hit, and it immobilizes the vehicle. Now, this is rated. All of these temporary are rated to P3 ratings. So this will travel to a maximum of 30 feet before it stops the vehicle. I'll give you a quick video here of how it moves. As a temporary barrier, it moves fairly freely and openly. The one thing with this barrier is it's 700 pounds, so it does take a larger person to actually move it with that dolly, but it is very effective. I'm gonna run this next video here so you can see how it reacts in a test. We'll put the music in these videos. But if you look at the when the vehicle hits the Archer barrier, that it's the travel. And that's really the biggest thing that we try to emphasize is once a vehicle hits it, how far it will travel. The other barrier available in the market is the MB3X barrier. It in itself is a lightweight. Each unit weighs 52 pounds. So compared to the 700-pound Archer barrier, this barrier, each unit weighs 52 pounds. So it can be easily taken out, deployed quickly on site, and it can be rapidly moved. It's actually rated. It's rated P3, but it's rated that entry level into P3. So this barrier itself is rated. It will travel just over 20 feet when it gets hit, and this is the first product that came out into the market, and it's the sort of the tried and tested and the most tested barrier in the market right now. And this is what you'll see at most events. This is there's sort of more MIFRAME in the Ontario market than there is anything. I'll show you a video of how this moves and how easily and freely this product moves. So this one itself is rated heavier than the Archer barrier. So I'll show you an example of what happens when it gets hit so you can see how it works itself. about a crash testing, these barriers all use the same principle. If you look at a crash system on the highway, that's what we call an energy absorption barrier. Those barriers are designed to protect blunt ends. That when a vehicle hits those barriers, it absorbs that energy from the crash. Half of it goes into the actual absorption of the barrier as the barrier crumples, and half of it goes into the vehicle to protect the occupants. These barriers use the same principle, except they redirect the energy up underneath the vehicle and they lift the vehicle up off the ground. That's how they're designed. So what it does is for events, we typically look at either the archers or the MIFRAM because they're less destructive barriers. When you get into P1 rated barriers themselves, what they typically do, it's like a wedge style barrier. What they typically do is they take that energy and they drive that energy into the ground, which enables the vehicle right away, but it also crumples up the occupancy cab of the vehicle. So if you look at most of the intrusions into events, 99% of them are pedal error, somebody's distracted. They've got into the event by accident. So when you're looking at your barriers, you really don't want to harm the occupant of the vehicle because it's an unintentional direction that they've gotten into the event itself. If it's when you start to look at different events where the political climate changes or the threat level changes, that's when you start to get into the P2 or P1 ratings because there's a higher chance of threat that somebody might come into that space and you just want to eradicate that threat. The Omni Stop itself is a slightly different style of barrier. So it's a heavy metal base with what are typically bollards on top of it. These are heavy weighted barriers. So they would get deployed. It's more of a longer term barrier than the other two. The other two you can rapidly deploy and set up and tear down. These ones are for more longer duration. They work. It works in the same principle. We've used it at different events. There's a gate built into these barriers, so it works with any emergency service vehicles that need to get through. They're a decent alternative to the other temporary barriers, just because for a longer duration period, where you're going to have the barriers out on the road for more than a week period. These are quite handy to put out. I'll show you what they look like getting hit. You can see by this barrier, you can see that steel plate takes most of the energy, and just the weight of the barrier itself is what stops it, as opposed to the other style of barriers where they redeploy that energy. This energy gets deployed throughout the barrier. So if you're looking at the Omni Stop, when you're building your plan, you want to look at what infrastructure is around it, because the whole actual mechanism will move itself. Then we get into more permanent structures that are available, temporary and or permanent. A lot of people put out, if you look at Cafe TO, they put out concrete blocks, which we've already gone through the concrete blocks and how they work or don't work. A lot of people think of putting planters out to stop vehicles. Well, planters aren't rated. There are rated planters, but most of the planters out there are just a concrete shell with your plants inside, and they react the same, as you can see from the picture here. They react the same as the concrete barrier. They're not. It's a false sense of security putting those out. It's more of a visual deterrent. So when we get into the actual planning itself, if we're putting product out, or if you're going to put product out as a visual deterrent, make sure it's noted in your traffic plan. So if you sell a security plan or an HVM plan, and you have to specify what the rating is and what it will do if it gets hit. And if you're putting something out as a deterrent, just make sure it's listed in that plan as a deterrent, as a visual deterrent, as a heavy stop itself. But if it's not listed, what happens is in terms of if something happens in the event and it causes all this different litigation and civil litigation, this is where a lot of events run the risk of where does the liability sit? And the liability sits in the actual planning itself. If it's planned and deployed properly and all the information is shared, then you're more defendable than if you've put something out inadvertently thinking, well, this is better than nothing, but it's not designed to be hit in the manner it is. And if you hurt the occupant of the vehicle or if you hurt people at the event, if we look at some of the recent events in the US, it just turns into the civil suits. So you really want to it's about collecting the information and sharing the information. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. So when you're planning you really want to look at the route leading into your event, what is in place. So this is if you look at the bottom right picture, they're traffic calming devices. These are permanent traffic calming devices, but you really want to look at what access do vehicles have coming into your event, and then how can you protect or slow down that vehicle itself. So when we planned events, we look at we always talk about it. If you look at the first picture, we call it a runway. Most events are on main streets. Those main streets are the perfect runway into the event. So what are we doing or putting in place, or what can you put in place to slow the vehicles down? So even if somebody's coming in by accident, we're reducing the speed of that vehicle heading into the event. So you want to look at where your final stop is, where you put your HVM product, and then work backwards into how far backwards and how quickly can a vehicle pick up speed. So we look at building temporary chicanes, and that's what we use the concrete barrier for, or the archers for, or you can use water barrier planters, anything in the road that makes a vehicle serpentine, and control the speed leading into the event. So when you start to plan, those are sort of the critical things. And when you walk through the guidelines, within those guidelines, and you're doing your risk assessment, that's one of the things that really questions in there. So you start to look at your surroundings and what's around you, to build out your plan. So you can see there are lots of different access points, and there's lots of different ways to reduce the vehicle speeds. We'll get into temporary or more permanent installations. So if you look at a lot of storefronts, or even if you look at Enbridge, all the Enbridge gas mains around have bollards on them, which are they're a steel post with concrete on them. They're not crash rated. They're more for bump protection. But if you need to protect an actual asset in around your community, you really want to look at a crash rated bollard. This is a good picture here because it shows a shallow mounted bollard by Marshalls. This crash rated bollard, you can see all the infrastructure that goes in the ground. So to make it to be a P1 rated bollard. So these bollards themselves will protect whatever infrastructure you have, or if you have an event at the same place every year, or it's a fairgrounds or event, you don't want to look at permanent, or you want to look at permanent over temporary. You really want to look at the rating and what the bollards are, because most bollards that get put out are not crash rated. If you look at Commonwealth Stadium, I think it was about 6 years ago, they put in a brand new crash rated gate, a beautiful gate, and they put bollards around it. They didn't put crash rated bollards. A driver inadvertently came over the sidewalk and hit that bollard, and all that bollard did was lift that vehicle up and make it airborne, and it landed on top of their brand new gate. So you really want to look at what type of product and what you want to protect, and there's tons of it in the market available for you. And the good thing is they can be blended. They can be blended into the surrounding area so they don't stand out, and you can turn anything into a crash rated bollard. So from any design. So if you look at these planters, for example, these planters have bollards inside them, but they aesthetically are appealing to the landscape around. So any urban planner or anything, they look at the design, and you can create whatever product you want inside a community or inside your event that's permanent. They do have temporary solutions as well. The difference is But when you look at the hostile vehicle mitigation barriers, the temporary ones, they sit on the ground, they don't penetrate the ground. If you look at anything temporary in terms of furniture, planters, or anything, for it to become rated, they typically will pin into the ground or take up infrastructure underneath the ground. So it's a more of a longer term solution. If anybody's been to London, England, if you look at all the bollards, London itself, as a city, has completely protected all of their buildings, all of their sidewalks in the city core, and they have different designs. So you can make any design you want. Everything's available in the marketplace for all these different landscape on that. If you look at the Arsenal Stadium, football stadium, the letters themselves have bollards inside them, so you can hide in plain sight. You can hide all of the vehicle mitigation equipment for more permanent structures. So that itself, I will leave it to questions from there. And there's a lot of information. It really comes down to what type of event you're having, where your event is, how many people you're getting in, what the congestion area, your access and egress points are, and then how you protect it. So it really comes when you're building your plan, it's really looking very early on, and then building your plan and building your HVM plan alongside your traffic management plan. So
That was really enlightening. It was, those videos were a little bit shocking, but so important to understand what can happen out there. Peter McCluskey asked, are water-filled barriers a viable and tested option?
they're designed for low speed. They're mass tested. So water barriers are mass tested, which is your highway traffic standard. Mass tested, again, is a redirectional barrier. So they were tested at a 45-degree angle, the same as a concrete barrier. So they're not designed to be hit at a 90-degree angle. So they will fail being hit at a 90-degree angle, the same as a concrete barrier. They're good for building traffic calming devices in the roadway, but they're not actually good unless you're running along an event. So but they will, when they hit at a 45, they travel over a meter into the event space while they redirect the barrier back or the vehicle back into the road.
Okay. He also asked, you mentioned the idea to incorporate existing structures such as planters and street posts, but is that risky if we don't know their stopping power? They're not being tested the way that concrete and other purpose-made barriers are tested.
Yeah, that's a big misconception. But I mean, we do it because if we limit the speed of the vehicle by building chicanes in, so by the time the vehicle hits the planter, if they're hitting the planter at 40 kilometers an hour, it will typically disable the vehicle. The new testing that the London police just did, it was about 3 months ago, they looked at all the HVM product on the market and all the planters and everything that would be in and around an urban area. And if you look at your ASTM testing, your MASH testing, everything's hit at a certain rate of speed. But what they said, well, what happens if we hit it slowly, if we drive up to it and try to push it? So they brought out this new test it's called a VAS test. And most of the product on the market unfortunately failed. It failed the push test. So you could drive up to it slowly and this is where the planters fail, or a concrete barrier. If you nudge up to a concrete barrier or a planter, you can push it out of the way. So if it's a planned attack or a planned assault on your event, with their first wave of vehicle would be and the first line of attack would be to move the barriers or the planters out of the way. If you look at that's why we primarily look at the MIFRAM barrier or the Pentagon barrier. Those barriers passed the nudge test because even when you hit it from the side, it still tangles up underneath the vehicle.
Okay. Catherine Wilson from Thunder Bay asked, what are the costs per single lane for Archer 1000 and MIFRAM units? Quote for MIFRAM for 16 units was $60K. Example.
Yeah. Unfortunately, to purchase them, so when we look at the purchase cost of them, everybody looks at the different pieces of barrier and they say, well, they're just a piece of steel. There isn't. The actual cost is all the testing and to get the crash rating for the barriers, it's very expensive. So that increases the cost of the barriers. So if you look at, she's right. If you look at 16 barriers, it's going to cost you 60,000, anywhere from 55 to $60,000. If you're looking at renting barriers, the MIFRAM barriers itself or the archers rent anywhere from $100 to $110 per unit, which would, so if you look at a typical laneway, you're going to be around $1,000 to close a lane.
And would that be for the whole festival or the whole event?
Yeah,
Or is that per day?
It's typically a day rate, but it depends on what the event is, the duration, and whether it's being manned or unmanned. Like there's different parameters that go into the pricing.
Okay. All right. So, one of the things that I thought of was you have to, like your industry, this industry that just seems to have evolved due to all the challenges that are out there and to make our festivals and events safe. You have to be a foreseer of what can happen in the future. And so because criminals are always looking for the next thing, right? How do you or can you anticipate that? It's hard to say. I remember many years ago somebody saying that they would interview criminals to try because they're always one step ahead. It was somebody in law enforcement to see if they could catch up with them.
I think the biggest thing is just understand when you look at your event space, understanding what's around, what access points there are, but really having the understanding, no matter what you can do, it's not fully protected.
Mm.
So you plan. So when you're planning in around the event space itself, you can put in as much mitigation as you want in certain areas, but if somebody has a planned coordinated effort, it unfortunately nothing is as secure as you want it to be. But you just put in as many measures as possible to mitigate the risk as much as possible to lessen that risk.
Somebody asked about what about using heavy machinery and driver remains in the car?
Yeah, and you see that at a lot of events. If you look at the city of Toronto, so we did an event this weekend at the city of Toronto, and they were using the TTC buses. The only issue with the buses or with using heavy machinery, it's not designed to be hit in the manner that you're using it for. So it's not crash rated. So it will work. Typically, it will work, and it will stop the vehicle. But you also open yourself up for some liability and litigation because you've put something in place. So you've recognized the risk. You've put something in place that isn't designed to be hit in the manner you're putting it in place. So if your operator gets injured or the passengers in the vehicle themselves, even if it's intentional, they get injured, then you get into the liability and you get into civil suits. And that's really what is changing this market is, well, what is designed to go in that space and what isn't designed to go in that space, and then where's the liability sit?
So are you saying that if someone intentionally does this, that they can sue the city or the organizer if they get injured?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's happening. I mean, we get sued. We get sued all the time because somebody will, whether it's a trip hazard or whether somebody's driven into something. Unfortunately, the way our world's going these days is everybody is going to try and make a dollar off whatever they can. So we get into civil suits all the time, whether it's intentional or not, whether they're at fault or not. So.
Wow. What if you use entry points for vendor car parking, no persons in the car?
Sorry, what's that question?
What if you use the entry points for vendor car parking and nobody's in the cars?
If you leave the vehicles to block an entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be, but it falls under the same principle as that vehicle wasn't designed to be hit in the manner you've put it in. So then you run into it all comes back to the liability, where the liability sits. And the liability will sit on the event organizer, whoever made that decision to put that vehicle there, because they recognize the risk, but they didn't put the proper protection in place.
And Catherine said we must ensure 6-meter clearance through the road closure area so fire trucks can always get through. So it might not be the best solution.
That's why we look at the event space when we're developing the plan. We always include fire, and we base the chicanes off their largest fire truck, so they can get through. And then when we're building gates or access into the events where you move the barriers, we want to make sure we have enough width in the gate itself so the emergency vehicles can get through.
And you work with a lot of the police forces, don't you, in Ontario?
Yeah, we ourselves, we work. We have different municipal contracts, but we work with a lot of the different police agencies in Ontario, whether it's Waterloo Police, Niagara Police, Toronto Police, York Regional Police. We work with the OPP at different events. And so it all depends on, we're in constant communication with the police forces.
Okay. So I guess the conversation, we use staggered water barricades. Yes, we use fire trucks to measure before we fill. So then we add an indemnity clause to vendor agreements. Yeah.
So, Debbie, what I mean by that?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Peter. That was following up on the question about using. So in our event, there are a couple of streets where there could be kind of a long on-ramp for a vehicle to drive in quickly, pick up speed. But if when vendors are loading in the morning, they just use that street and park on it, and so it's a huge visual deterrent, number one. And then in our agreement with those vendors, we insert an indemnity clause that, hey, we're giving you this parking area, but in the event of a hostile vehicle or accidental vehicle, we're not liable.
Okay.
That works. It's about covering yourself, right, from your event, and how you cover yourself and where you what measures you put in place. You'll notice now a lot of permits being issued, road occupancy permits by different cities are now asking for different types of mitigation to be put in place in their permits. It's part of their permit process. Now we're starting to see that more and more where they're forcing it into the event space.
And what about insurance? Like, is that the insurance changing in that arena? I don't know if you would know the answer to that question, but
yeah, the insurance follows the litigation in civil suits, right? So as more litigation in civil suits, as they pay out more, their parameters are changing. So that really is, and if you really, what it comes down to, if you make the decision to put something out that isn't rated, then obviously you have more chance of litigation. So your risk of insurance premiums going up are definitely coming.
all right. Holly said, we have to do a traffic control plan to accompany the application for closure or usage, and then get a COI from the event organizer naming the district as an additional insured. Okay. Okay.
Standard.
Well, I'm in Muskoka. Thanks, Holly. That was amazing, eye-opening, and just another thing that we all have to be aware of when we're planning our events. Are there any events that might not need this that you think about? Like, I'm thinking here in Kitchener, there's Victoria Park. There are some roads leading in, but it's really, I'm just wondering if it would work, or Santa Claus parades.
It comes down to risk assessment when you look at your surround and what's around you and what's the access point from vehicles. A lot of events, if they're in controlled spaces, so they're in, like if you look at Mel Lastman Square in Toronto, I don't know if most people are familiar with that. Mount Lastman Square is blocked by buildings, and they're looking at putting bollards along the sidewalk, so vehicles just won't have access into that space. When it's a secured space like that, then there's obviously you don't need the protection. When it's an unsecured space, then you need to start looking at what measures of protection you have.
Yeah, and somebody like Santa Claus parades and the 10-mile road race. Would those require, because to me, it would seem like, I think about, isn't there a big race that goes over Don Valley Parkway? And like that to me would require some sort of protection.
Yeah, so we are doing it's a Bike for Brain Health, I believe, this weekend, which shuts down the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardner. The city brings out, so for that event, we close off the ramps, but the city themselves brings out their snowplows and blocks the ramps physically with their snowplows
Okay.
beyond the barriers on the other side of the barriers. So
But
there,
would
I
that,
mean, the problem is when it's a contained event, it's easier. When you get into a long duration, like a marathon,
got
there
it.
really isn't. We look at, we change the plan. So when the runners are running during the route, there really isn't, because it's too wide a space to protect itself. So we look at the congestion areas. So your start and finish points are where you have your mass of people. Those are the areas we protect. So when we do the Sporting Life 10K run, we protect those areas where people congregate, as opposed to you just cannot protect the whole route, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. And Catherine also said for Pride Parade, we use police cruisers at close main intersections, but wooden barricades for side streets, manned by volunteers or security. So parades are not really able to secure. An emergency vehicle must never be blocked for access to roads. There's so much to think about, right? When you're running an event like this.
Yeah. And the problem that most events have, especially towns, if it's a private event and it's a ticketed event, there's funding, and most events aren't like that. So there isn't funding. So unfortunately, you have to come up with the best solutions with the budget that you have available. And I will say, as much as we talk about putting out HVM barriers, if you put a truck out, at least you've put something out to protect the occupants. I mean, it's better
Right.
than nothing. As much as we harp on, okay, we need proper protection. At the end of the day, it's all about protecting people. And if you
Right.
put something out that's going to protect them, it's better than having nothing.
Right. Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much, Owen, for joining us and sharing your wisdom and knowledge around all of this and making this masterclass eye-opening. So
Debbie, I'll send you the guidelines that the Ontario Traffic Council put together,
perfect.
and you can
Thank
share
you.
that with everybody.
Thank you very much. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Next week we have Prevail activations again. I hope you'll join us and have a great week. And we will see you next on June 3rd.
Thanks for listening to FEO on the Air, the voice of festivals and events in Ontario.